In the rugged American frontier of 1847, cattle rancher Samuel "Bull" Morrison owns the most valuable prize bull in 3 territories, a magnificent beast that could secure any man's fortune. When desperate circumstances force him into an impossible trade with traveling merchant Jacob Brennan, Samuel exchanges his prized bull for something he never expected: Brennan's spirited daughter Elena as his bride. What begins as a cold business transaction in the harsh Wyoming territory transforms into an epic tale of survival, unexpected love, and the forging of a legacy that would shape the American West. As Elena and Samuel face cattle rustlers' brutal winters and the challenges of building a life together, their unlikely partnership becomes the foundation of one of the West's greatest ranching empires. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Wyoming territory as Samuel Morrison stood beside the wooden fence of his ranch, watching his prize bull Thunder graze in the pasture. The massive Hereford bull, with his distinctive white face and rust-colored coat, represented everything Samuel had worked for in his 32 years of life. Thunder wasn't just cattle. He was Samuel's future, his security, and his pride rolled into nearly 2,000 pounds of prime breeding stock. Samuel ran his weathered hand through his dark hair, squinting against the autumn sun of 1847. His ranch, carved out of the wilderness with nothing but determination and backbreaking labor, sprawled across 500 acres of some of the finest grazing land in the territory. The log cabin he'd built with his own hands sat modest but sturdy against the backdrop of the Wind River Mountains, smoke curling from its stone chimney into the crisp morning air. Thunder lifted his massive head, steam rising from his nostrils in the cool air, and let out a low, rumbling bellow that echoed across the valley. Samuel smiled despite the worry gnawing at his gut. That bull had cost him every cent he'd saved over 5 years of punishing work, but Thunder's bloodline was legendary. Calves sired by Thunder would command top dollar from ranchers across 3 territories. "Morning, Mr. Morrison," came a voice from behind him. Samuel turned to see young Billy Henderson approaching, his 15-year-old frame looking small against the vast landscape. Billy worked part-time at the ranch, helping with the daily chores in exchange for room, board, and a small wage. The boy's father had died in a mining accident the previous spring, leaving Billy to help support his mother and 2 younger sisters in town. "Morning, Billy," Samuel replied, tipping his worn hat. "How's your mother faring?" Billy's face darkened slightly. She's struggling, Mr. Morrison. The general store won't extend any more credit, and winter's coming fast. I was wondering if perhaps you might have some extra work, maybe something that pays a bit more." Samuel felt the familiar tug of sympathy. He'd been orphaned young himself, knew the weight of responsibility that settled on a boy's shoulders when circumstances demanded he become a man overnight. "I'll see what I can do, Billy. Maybe there's some fence repair work that needs doing before the snow flies." The sound of wagon wheels and horse hooves interrupted their conversation. Both men turned toward the main road that wound past Samuel's property, watching as a large covered wagon approached, pulled by a team of 4 sturdy horses. The wagon was travel-worn, its canvas cover patched in several places, and dust covered everything from the wheels to the driver's hat. As the wagon drew closer, Samuel could make out 3 figures on the driver's bench: a bearded man handling the reins, a woman in a blue dress and bonnet, and what appeared to be a younger woman or girl beside her. The wagon slowed, then turned onto the dirt track leading to Samuel's cabin. "Travelers," Billy observed unnecessarily. Samuel nodded, straightening his shoulders. Hospitality was an unwritten law of the frontier, where the next neighbor might be 50 miles away, and a warm meal or a safe place to sleep could mean the difference between life and death. He walked toward the approaching wagon, Billy falling into step beside him. The bearded man brought the wagon to a stop near the cabin and climbed down with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent considerable time on the trail. He was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his early 50s, with intelligent brown eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. His clothes were well-made but travel-stained, and he carried himself with the confident bearing of a successful merchant. "Good morning," the man called out, touching the brim of his hat. "Name's Jacob Brennan. I'm hoping you might spare some water for my horses and perhaps direct me toward the nearest town." "Samuel Morrison," Samuel replied, extending his hand. "Water's free to any traveler, and the town of Sunrise is about 12 miles northeast. You'll want to follow the main road until you reach Miller's Creek, then head due north." Jacob shook Samuel's hand with a firm grip. "Much obliged, Mr. Morrison. We've been traveling hard for 3 days and the horses are about done in." As Jacob moved to unhitch his team, Samuel got his first clear look at the 2 women still seated on the wagon bench. The older woman, probably Jacob's wife, had graying hair tucked neatly under her bonnet and kind eyes lined with the weathering of prairie sun and wind. But it was the younger woman who captured Samuel's attention. She appeared to be in her early 20s with auburn hair that caught the morning light where it escaped from her bonnet. Her green eyes held an alertness and intelligence that immediately struck Samuel, along with something else, a wariness, perhaps even a hint of sadness. She wore a simple blue dress that had seen better days but was clean and well mended, and her hands clasped in her lap showed the calluses of someone accustomed to work. "My wife Martha," Jacob said, helping the older woman down from the wagon, "and my daughter Elena." Elena climbed down from the wagon with graceful efficiency, her movements economical and purposeful. When she looked at Samuel, he felt an unexpected jolt, as if thunder had knocked the wind from his lungs. She nodded politely but said nothing, her green eyes taking in everything: the ranch, the cabin, thunder grazing in the distance, Samuel himself. "Pleased to meet you both," Samuel managed, suddenly conscious of his rough appearance and the fact that he hadn't shaved in 3 days. Martha Brennan smiled warmly. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Morrison. We've heard that Western hospitality isn't just legend, and you're proving that true." While Jacob watered the horses at the well Samuel had dug near the cabin, Martha and Elena remained near the wagon. Samuel noticed Elena studying Thunder with obvious appreciation. "That's a magnificent bull," she said quietly, speaking for the first time. Her voice carried a slight accent that Samuel couldn't quite place, perhaps German or Dutch. "Thunder," Samuel replied, pride evident in his voice. "Finest Hereford bull in 3 territories. His calves will establish bloodlines that'll be talked about for generations." Elena's eyes lit with genuine interest. "My father deals in livestock sometimes, among other things. He'd know quality when he sees it." Jacob finished watering the horses and walked back toward the group, but Samuel noticed the man's attention was also drawn to Thunder. Jacob studied the bull with the calculating eye of someone who understood the value of superior breeding stock. "That's quite an animal you have there, Mr. Morrison," Jacob said thoughtfully. "I've seen a lot of cattle in my travels, but that bull would be worth a small fortune in the eastern markets." Samuel felt a flush of pride mixed with anxiety. Thunder was indeed worth a fortune Samuel desperately needed. The previous winter had been brutal, killing off nearly half his herd. Spring roundup had revealed the full extent of his losses, and now, with winter approaching again, Samuel faced a stark reality. He had barely enough cattle left to survive another harsh season, and definitely not enough to rebuild his herd to profitable levels. The irony wasn't lost on him. He owned one of the most valuable bulls in the territory, an animal that could sire champions and establish a dynasty, but he might not have enough cows left to make Thunder's breeding potential worthwhile. It was like owning a palace but having no money for food. Like this video if you're enjoying this incredible frontier story. Subscribe to hear more amazing tales from the American West, and comment below to let us know where you're watching from. "You know," Jacob continued, his merchant's mind clearly working, "I've got connections throughout the Eastern Territories, cattle buyers in Chicago, St. Louis, even as far east as Philadelphia. A bull like that could command prices you might not even imagine out here." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. While he appreciated the compliment, talk of Thunder's value only reminded him of his precarious situation. "Thunder's not for sale," he said firmly, though the words felt hollow even to his own ears. Jacob nodded respectfully. "Of course not. A man doesn't part with an animal like that lightly." He paused, studying Samuel with shrewd eyes. "Though sometimes circumstances can change a man's perspective on what's necessary." The comment hit closer to home than Samuel cared to admit. He forced a smile and changed the subject. "You folks hungry? It's getting on toward noon and I've got beans and cornbread that won't eat themselves." Martha's face brightened. "That's very generous, Mr. Morrison, but we couldn't impose—" "No imposition at all," Samuel interrupted. "Like I said, hospitality's the law out here." As they moved toward the cabin, Elena fell into step beside Samuel. "Your ranch is beautiful," she said quietly. "It must have taken years to build all this." 5 years of backbreaking work, Samuel admitted. "Every fence post, every building, every cleared acre. Started with nothing but a government land claim and a determination to make something of myself." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "My father's been in business for 20 years, but he always says the hardest work is building something from nothing. It takes a special kind of person." There was something in her tone that made Samuel glance at her more carefully. Despite her youth, Elena carried herself with the bearing of someone who'd seen hardship and understood the cost of survival. Her hands, he noticed again, were those of a worker, not a pampered merchant's daughter. Inside the modest cabin, Samuel's bachelor accommodations suddenly felt embarrassingly sparse. The single room contained a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, and shelves lined with supplies and a few precious books. Everything was clean and functional, but it was clearly the home of a man living alone. Martha took in the space with kind eyes. "You've built a good home, Mr. Morrison. Solid and warm. That's what matters." While Samuel prepared the simple meal, Jacob examined the books on his shelf. Marcus Aurelius, Plutarch, even some Shakespeare, Jacob observed with surprise. Not what one typically expects to find in a frontier cabin. Samuel felt heat rise in his cheeks. "My mother taught school back in Ohio before she died. She always said a man's mind was his most important tool no matter where life took him." "A wise woman," Elena said softly. "What brought you west?" Samuel ladled beans into wooden bowls, considering his answer. "My father died when I was 16, lost the farm to debts. I could have stayed, worked for other people's dreams, or I could come west and build my own. Seemed like an easy choice at the time." "And now?" Jacob asked perceptively. Samuel hesitated, then decided honesty might serve him better than pride. "Now I'm learning that building dreams and keeping them alive are 2 different challenges entirely." As they ate the simple meal, conversation flowed more easily. Jacob spoke of his travels as a merchant, dealing in everything from livestock to farm equipment to household goods. He'd started in Pennsylvania, worked his way through Ohio and Indiana, and was now exploring opportunities in the expanding Western territories. "The country's growing faster than anyone imagined," Jacob explained. "Families streaming west every day, all needing goods and services. A man with the right connections and enough capital can build a substantial business." Martha shared stories of their travels, the people they'd met, the communities they'd seen struggling to establish themselves in the wilderness. But it was Elena who surprised Samuel most. When the conversation turned to livestock, she demonstrated a knowledge that rivaled many ranchers he'd known. "Father taught me to evaluate breeding stock when I was 12, she explained when Samuel commented on her expertise. "When you're dealing with farmers and ranchers, it helps to understand their business. A good breeding bull can transform a struggling operation into a profitable enterprise within just a few seasons." "Assuming the rancher has enough cows to breed," Samuel said bitterly, then immediately regretted revealing so much. Jacob's eyes sharpened with interest. "Tough winter last year?" Samuel nodded reluctantly. "Lost nearly half my herd. Spring was late, grass was scarce, and by the time the thaw came, damage was done. I've got the finest bull in 3 territories and barely enough cows left to justify keeping him." The cabin fell quiet, except for the crackling of the fire. Samuel cursed himself for admitting his weakness to strangers, even friendly ones. In the frontier, showing vulnerability could be dangerous. Word traveled fast, and predators, both human and animal, were always looking for easy prey. But Jacob's expression wasn't predatory. Instead, the merchant looked thoughtful, almost sympathetic. "How many breeding cows do you have left?" 43, Samuel admitted. "Started with nearly 100. Jacob whistled low. "That's a substantial loss. But 43 cows and a bull like Thunder, that's still the foundation of something significant given time." "Time's what I don't have," Samuel said grimly. "Winter's coming, and I barely have enough feed stored to keep what cattle I have alive. If this winter's as bad as last year, I'll lose the rest." Elena had been listening intently, her green eyes moving between her father and Samuel. "What will you do?" she asked quietly. Samuel met her gaze, seeing genuine concern there. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been trying to figure that out for months." Jacob leaned back in his chair, his merchant's mind clearly working. "You know, Mr. Morrison, sometimes the solution to one man's problem can be the answer to another man's need." "What do you mean?" "I mean that bull of yours represents capital, significant capital, and capital properly invested can multiply itself. Sometimes a man has to risk what he has to save what he's built." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I already told you Thunder's not for sale. Not for money, perhaps," Jacob said carefully. "But there are other kinds of transactions, other arrangements that might benefit both parties." The way Jacob said it, with a meaningful glance toward Elena, made Samuel's stomach clench with sudden understanding. In the frontier, where women were scarce and survival often depended on partnership, such arrangements weren't unheard of. But the suggestion hanging in the air felt both shocking and strangely compelling. Elena's cheeks had colored, but she didn't look away. Instead, she held Samuel's gaze with a directness that was both unsettling and intriguing. "What exactly are you proposing?" Samuel asked quietly. Jacob set down his coffee cup with deliberate care, his eyes never leaving Samuel's face. "I'm proposing a trade that could solve both our problems, Mr. Morrison. You need capital and resources to rebuild your ranch. I need to secure a good future for my daughter in a land of opportunity." Samuel felt the blood drain from his face. "You're talking about trading your daughter like she's livestock." "I'm talking about a marriage arrangement," Jacob corrected firmly. "Elena needs a husband, a man of character who can provide for her and build a life worth living. You need a partner and the resources to save your ranch. Thunder represents value, but Elena represents something far more precious, a partnership that could last a lifetime." Elena had remained silent during this exchange, but now she spoke up, her voice steady despite the flush in her cheeks. "I'm not a piece of property to be traded, Father. And Mr. Morrison didn't come west looking for a wife to be forced upon him. No one's forcing anything," Jacob said gently. "I'm simply suggesting that sometimes fate presents opportunities that wisdom recognizes, even when they come in unexpected forms." Samuel pushed back from the table, his mind reeling. "This is insane. You can't just arrive at a man's ranch and propose to trade your daughter for his bull. He struggled for words. "It's not civilized." Martha spoke for the first time since the conversation had taken this turn. "Mr. Morrison, I understand your shock, but perhaps you should know something about our circumstances before you judge too harshly." Jacob nodded to his wife, and she continued. "Elena was engaged to be married back in Pennsylvania. A good man, a prosperous farmer. But 3 weeks before the wedding, he was killed in a mill accident. Elena was left with nothing, no husband, no prospects, and frankly, no inheritance. We're heading west because there's nothing left for us in the east." Elena's composure never wavered, but Samuel caught the flash of pain in her green eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly. "Thank you," Elena replied. "But I didn't come west to be a burden on anyone, including my parents. I came west to build a new life, whatever form that might take." Jacob leaned forward earnestly. "Samuel, may I call you Samuel? I'm not suggesting you take my daughter as some kind of indentured servant. I'm proposing a legitimate marriage between two people who need each other, even if they don't yet know it." "I don't need a wife," Samuel said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. The loneliness of frontier life was a constant companion, and the practical challenges of managing a ranch alone were overwhelming. "Don't you?" Jacob asked perceptively. "You're facing the loss of everything you've built. Elena knows livestock, understands business, and she's proven she can work as hard as any man. More importantly, she's proven she can endure hardship and loss without breaking." Samuel looked at Elena, who was watching him with those intelligent green eyes. "And what do you think about this arrangement?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving from Samuel to the modest but well-built cabin, then out the window toward Thunder grazing in the distance. "I think," she said finally, "that marriages built on practical foundations often prove stronger than those built on romantic notions that fade with the first hardship." "But you don't know me," Samuel protested. "I could be cruel or lazy or—" "Could you?" Elena interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "A cruel man doesn't invite strangers to share his food. A lazy man doesn't build all this from nothing. And a man without character doesn't read Marcus Aurelius in a frontier cabin." Despite the impossible situation, Samuel found himself almost smiling. Elena's directness was refreshing even when it was unsettling. "You're very observant." "I've had to be," Elena replied simply. "When you've lost everything once, you learn to evaluate quickly what's worth saving and what's worth risking." Jacob pressed his advantage. "Think about it practically, Samuel. Elena brings more than just herself to this arrangement. I have connections throughout the Eastern Territories, contacts who could help you market your cattle at premium prices. I have capital to invest in rebuilding your herd, and I have knowledge of markets and business practices that could transform your ranch from a survival operation into a profitable enterprise." "You're asking me to marry a woman I met 3 hours ago," Samuel said, though he could hear his own resolve weakening. "I'm asking you to consider a partnership that could save everything you've worked for," Jacob countered. "Elena is intelligent, hardworking, and capable. She understands the livestock business better than most men I've dealt with, and frankly, she deserves better than being dragged from territory to territory while her old father chases after business opportunities that may never materialize." Samuel turned to Elena again. "And you'd be willing to marry a stranger, And stay in this wilderness? Elena met his gaze steadily. I'd be willing to marry a good man who could offer me a chance to build something meaningful. The wilderness doesn't frighten me, Mr. Morrison. Poverty and powerlessness do. The honesty in her voice cut through Samuel's confusion. Here was a woman who understood the harsh realities of frontier life, who had already faced loss and disappointment, and who was practical enough to recognize opportunity even in unlikely circumstances. What exactly would this arrangement entail? Samuel asked slowly. Jacob smiled, sensing the shift in Samuel's tone. Thunder in exchange for Elena's hand in marriage, plus my investment in rebuilding your herd. I'd purchase 50 quality breeding cows to be delivered before winter. Additionally, I'd provide the capital needed to buy sufficient feed and supplies to see you through to spring. Samuel's heart pounded. 50 breeding cows plus the feed and supplies he needed would not only save his ranch but position him for real prosperity. Thunder's offspring, combined with careful breeding management, could establish a cattle operation that would be profitable for generations. But it would mean marrying Elena, binding his life to hers before he truly knew her character, her temperament, her dreams, or her fears. This is the most unusual business proposition I've ever heard, Samuel said finally. The frontier requires unusual solutions, Jacob replied. The question is whether you're bold enough to recognize opportunity when it presents itself. Elena stood up from the table, her decision apparently made regardless of Samuel's choice. I think I'll step outside for some air while you gentlemen conclude your negotiations, she said, with just a hint of irony in her voice. As she moved toward the door, she paused beside Samuel's chair. For what it's worth, Mr. Morrison, I think you're a good man facing an impossible choice. Whatever you decide, I won't hold it against you. After Elena stepped outside, the cabin fell into tense silence. Samuel stared at the rough wooden table, his mind racing through the implications of Jakob's proposal. Outside, he could hear Elena's footsteps on the porch boards, steady and measured like everything else about her. You're asking me to risk everything on a stranger, Samuel said finally. No, Jacob corrected. I'm asking you to save everything by trusting in something larger than yourself. You've spent 5 years building this ranch alone. Maybe it's time to consider that some things are meant to be built together. Martha spoke up quietly. Samuel, may I share something with you? Elena has been managing our household accounts for 3 years. She negotiated the prices for our wagon, our supplies, even the route we're taking west. That girl has a mind for business that would put most men to shame. And she chose to come west, Jacob added. When we decided to leave Pennsylvania, Elena could have stayed with her aunt's family in Philadelphia. She could have found work as a seamstress or a teacher. Instead, she chose the uncertainty of the frontier because she believed there were opportunities here worth the risk. Samuel walked to the window and watched Elena standing near Thunder's paddock. The massive bull had approached the fence, and Elena was talking to him softly, her hands moving expressively as if she were having a genuine conversation. Thunder, who was typically aggressive toward strangers, stood calmly listening to her voice. She has a way with animals, Samuel observed. She has a way with everything she sets her mind to, Jacob said proudly. Elena learned to read when she was 4, was keeping books for local merchants by the time she was 12, and was managing a household that included my business affairs by 15. If you marry her, you won't just be getting a wife, you'll be getting a business partner. Samuel continued watching Elena through the window. She had moved on from Thunder and was now examining the other cattle in the nearby paddock, her practiced eye clearly evaluating their condition and breeding potential. Every few moments, she would make a note in a small book she'd pulled from her dress pocket. What's she doing? Samuel asked. Jacob joined him at the window and smiled. Probably calculating how many calves your current cows could produce, what the market value would be, and how quickly you could rebuild your herd to optimal levels. Elena can't help herself. When she sees a business opportunity, her mind immediately starts working through the possibilities. The door opened and Elena re-entered the cabin. Mr. Morrison, may I ask you something? Of course. When you lost those cattle last winter, what did you do with the carcasses? The question surprised him. Buried what I could, burned the rest. Why? Did you save the hides? Samuel nodded slowly. About 30 good ones. They're in the barn, waiting for me to figure out what to do with them. Elena's eyes lit up. 30 hides could bring significant income if properly processed and marketed. There's a growing demand for quality leather goods in the Eastern Territories, and with my father's connections, we could secure premium prices. We? Samuel caught the word immediately. Elena blushed slightly but didn't back down. I'm sorry, I shouldn't assume. It's just that when I see inefficiency or missed opportunities, I can't help but think about solutions. Jakob was beaming with pride. You see? This is exactly what I mean. Elena doesn't just see problems. She sees potential. Samuel found himself studying Elena with new interest. What else do you see when you look at my ranch? Elena hesitated, glancing at her father. Are you sure you want my honest assessment? I insist on it. Elena took a breath and began speaking with the confidence of someone who truly understood livestock operations. Your grazing rotation could be optimized to support 20% more cattle on the same acreage. Your barn design is excellent, but you need additional shelter for calving season. The creek that runs through your property could support a small mill operation, providing both income and processed grain for feed. And with Thunder's bloodline, you should be offering breeding services to other ranchers instead of keeping his genetics solely for your own herd. Samuel stared at her in amazement. You figured all that out in the 30 minutes you were outside? I've been thinking about it since we first saw your ranch this morning, Elena admitted. I apologize if I'm overstepping, but I can't help but see the potential here. This could be one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory with the right management and investment. The conviction in her voice struck Samuel powerfully. Here was someone who saw not just what his ranch was, but what it could become. After months of barely surviving, of seeing only problems and limitations, Elena's vision of possibility was intoxicating. Jakob, Samuel said slowly, assuming I were to consider this arrangement, what exactly would the terms be? Jakob leaned forward eagerly. Thunder in exchange for Elena's hand in marriage. I provide 50 breeding cows delivered within 6 weeks plus feed and supplies sufficient for the winter. Additionally, I invest in improvements to your operation, additional shelter, equipment, whatever Elena determines is necessary to maximize productivity. And your expectations regarding Elena? That you treat her with respect and give her the chance to build something meaningful alongside you. Elena is not a decoration, Samuel. She's a partner who could help transform your ranch into an empire. Samuel turned to Elena. And what are your expectations? Elena met his gaze directly. Honesty, partnership, and the chance to prove that I can contribute as much to this operation as anyone. I'm not looking for romance, Mr. Morrison, though I hope we might develop mutual respect and affection over time. I'm looking for the opportunity to build something lasting. The practical nature of her response should have felt cold, but instead it reassured Samuel. This wasn't about passion or romantic fantasies. It was about two people with complementary skills and mutual needs finding a way to build something together. There's one more thing, Jakob added. Elena brings a dowry beyond what I've already mentioned. She has documentation of breeding records from some of the finest cattle operations in Pennsylvania, plus contacts with buyers throughout the Eastern Territories. Information like that could be worth more than the cattle themselves. Samuel walked to the fireplace and stared into the flames, his mind wrestling with the decision. Everything logical pointed toward accepting the arrangement. Elena was intelligent, capable, and understood the livestock business better than he'd dared hope to find in any partner. Jakob's investment would not only save his ranch, but position it for unprecedented success. But it meant binding his life to a woman he'd known for less than a day, trusting his future to people who were essentially strangers. On the other hand, his current path led only to failure and the loss of everything he'd worked to build. If I agree to this, Samuel said finally, when would the marriage take place? There's a circuit judge in Millfield who comes through every 6 weeks, Martha said. He was here last week, so he'll be back in about 5 weeks. 5 weeks, Samuel repeated. Time enough to get to know each other better before making it official. Elena nodded. Time enough to see if we can work together and for you to decide if you can trust me with your life's work. Samuel extended his hand to Elena. Miss Hartman, would you be willing to enter into a partnership that could change both our lives forever? Elena looked at his outstretched hand, then into his eyes. Mr. Morrison, I believe I would. As their hands met in a firm handshake, none of them could have imagined that this moment, this unusual exchange of a prize bull for a bride, would indeed change the West forever. The following 5 weeks transformed Samuel's ranch in ways he had never imagined possible. Elena proved to be everything her father had promised and more. She rose before dawn each day, working alongside Samuel to implement the improvements she had envisioned. Her business acumen was remarkable. She negotiated with suppliers, reorganized the grazing schedules, and established breeding records with a precision that impressed even experienced ranchers. Jakob delivered on every promise. The 50 breeding cows arrived in excellent condition, along with enough feed and supplies to sustain the operation through winter. But more valuable than the material contributions was Elena's knowledge. She had brought detailed breeding charts from Pennsylvania's finest cattle operations, and her connections with Eastern buyers soon had Samuel negotiating contracts for premium beef at prices he had never dreamed possible. As they worked together day after day, Samuel found himself genuinely impressed by Elena's character. She was tireless, practical, and possessed an intuitive understanding of cattle that complemented his own experience perfectly. More importantly, she approached their partnership with a quiet dignity that made their unusual arrangement feel natural rather than awkward. "You know," Samuel said one evening as they reviewed the ranch's financial projections, "I never expected to find myself grateful for a drought." Elena looked up from the ledger where she was recording the day's breeding schedules. "Why is that?" "Because without it, I never would have needed to consider trading Thunder. And without that trade, I never would have met you." Elena smiled, the first truly warm smile Samuel had seen from her since they'd met. "Are you satisfied with your bargain then?" "More than satisfied," Samuel replied honestly. "I feel like I traded one bull for an entire future." The circuit judge arrived on schedule, and their wedding was a simple affair attended by a handful of neighboring ranchers who had come to witness the union of the territory's most promising cattle operation. Elena wore a simple blue dress that brought out her green eyes, and Samuel had purchased a new suit from the general store in Millfield. As they exchanged vows, Samuel realized that what had begun as a practical arrangement had evolved into something deeper. He genuinely cared for Elena, respected her intelligence, and looked forward to building their life together. Their first year of marriage exceeded every projection Elena had calculated. Thunder's offspring proved exceptional, and Elena's breeding program produced calves that caught the attention of ranchers throughout the territory. Word of their success spread quickly, and soon Samuel found himself consulting with other ranchers about livestock management and breeding techniques. Elena established what became known as the Morrison Method, a systematic approach to cattle breeding and ranch management that maximized both productivity and profitability. She documented every aspect of their operation, creating detailed records that other ranchers began requesting copies of. By their second year, the Morrison Ranch had become a destination for cattle buyers from as far away as Chicago and St. Louis. Elena's Eastern connections, combined with the superior quality of their livestock, commanded premium prices that transformed them from struggling survivors into the most prosperous ranchers in the territory. But their influence extended far beyond their own success. Elena began teaching other ranch wives about bookkeeping, business management, and livestock breeding. She established a network of female ranchers who shared information and supported each other's operations, fundamentally changing how ranch businesses were managed throughout the region. Samuel found himself appointed to the Territorial Livestock Commission, where he advocated for the breeding standards and business practices that Elena had developed. Their methods were adopted by ranchers across the Western Territories, improving the quality of American cattle and establishing breeding programs that would influence the industry for generations. 5 years after their marriage, Samuel and Elena stood on their porch watching Thunder, now a legendary bull whose offspring had spread throughout the West, grazing peacefully in the meadow. Their ranch had grown from a failing operation to an empire that employed dozens of workers and managed thousands of head of cattle. "Do you ever regret it?" Samuel asked Elena as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Regret what?" Elena replied, her hand resting on her growing belly where their first child was developing. "The trade, leaving Pennsylvania, marrying a stranger." Elena was quiet for a moment, then turned to face her husband. "Samuel, we didn't just save your ranch. We created something that's changing how the entire cattle industry operates. Our methods are being used from Texas to Montana. The breeding records I developed are being studied by agricultural colleges, and the business practices we established are being taught to ranchers' wives throughout the territories." Samuel nodded, understanding the full scope of what they had accomplished together. What had begun as a desperate trade to save a failing ranch had evolved into innovations that were literally changing the West. Their systematic approach to cattle breeding was improving livestock quality across the frontier. Elena's business methods were empowering ranch families to achieve prosperity they had never thought possible, and their partnership had demonstrated that marriages built on mutual respect and shared goals could flourish, even in the harsh realities of frontier life. "That bull," Elena continued, "represented the end of your old life, but our partnership represents the beginning of something much larger. We didn't just change our own fortunes, we changed how people think about ranching, about business, about what's possible when people work together toward common goals." Samuel pulled Elena close, marveling at how a moment of desperation had led to a lifetime of purpose and prosperity. The trade that had seemed impossible, his prize bull for a bride, had indeed changed the West forever, creating innovations and opportunities that would influence generations of ranchers who followed in their footsteps. As the stars emerged in the vast Montana sky, Samuel and Elena Morrison stood together, partners in every sense of the word, having built an empire that began with faith, flourished through hard work, and transformed an entire industry through their unwavering commitment to excellence and each other. The end